close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing in the heart of a tiny village in medieval England. A winter night, so cold your breath turns to white smoke. So sharp, the wind slips through the thatched roofs, as if it's searching for a way straight into your bones. There are no electric heaters, no plush modern blankets, no glass windows to keep the wind at bay. There is only people and the little warmth they manage to gather in the longest winter nights of their lives. And yet they sleep. They survive. They make it through each needle-cold night with ways that seem simple, yet are clever, enduring, and deeply, beautifully human. In tonight's story, you and I are going to wander slowly through their small wooden homes, their thin straw beds, their tiny shuttered sleeping alcoves, the embers they tend all night long, and the rare, tender moments of warmth they protect with every ounce of patience they have. If you're ready to loosen your shoulders, to slow yourself down, and to listen to a piece of history told gently, stay right here with me. And before we begin, you're welcome to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep traveling together through quiet little journeys like this one. Shall we begin? Take a slow, deep breath and let your shoulders soften as gently as an old wool scarf folded by someone at the end of a long day. As your eyes begin to grow familiar with the tender darkness around you, you start to sense an old painting coming to life. A winter night in the English countryside of the Middle Ages. A time when there were no electric heaters, no warming machines, nothing except the warmth of one another and the patience needed to endure an endlessly cold season. And now you're standing there, not with the frozen feet of someone from the past, but with the quiet ease of your imagination, carried by a breath as soft as falling snow. You find yourself walking down a narrow village path, just wide enough for an old wooden cart to pass through, and winter has draped it with a heavy blanket of silence. The wind blows in from the empty fields, sharp enough to sting your skin like tiny needles. You inhale, and your breath turns into small trails of smoke, drifting away and disappearing into the night. The houses lining the road are capped with a thin layer of frost, as if someone had sprinkled cold white powder over their roofs. The old wooden shingles tremble whenever the wind sweeps by, crackling like the hushed whisper of an elderly storyteller. You can hear the wind slipping through the gaps of the village, not hurried, not loud, just the voice of winter, the voice of long nights that have never been gentle to humankind. At times, it sounds like a long, wandering whistle. At other moments, like someone calling from very far away, so far that you can't tell whether it's real or simply your imagination, stirred awake by the wind. When you take another step, your imagined feet touch the ground hard as stone. Here, when winter arrives, the earth freezes solid, tough enough that people say you can hear it crack quietly beneath your steps, as if the whole world is trying to endure the cold alongside its inhabitants. You reach out and touch the air. It's a sharp, dry, cold on that doesn't just sit on your skin, but seeps into the center of your palm. In the village, a few homes still glow faintly through their tiny windows. The light is soft and yellow, trembling slightly with the flicker of the fire inside. It's not enough to brighten the whole path, but enough to tell you that within those houses, someone is doing their best to hold on to the last warmth of the day. You pause before a low-roofed home. You can almost imagine peeking inside rough earthen walls, a wooden roof so low you could almost reach it, and strands of straw poking out through the cracks. The entire house breathes winter, the kind of winter breath only those who lived without heaters could ever truly understand. Cold, persistent, and a gentle reminder that the night is far from over. But what draws your attention isn't just the cold. It's an old question, one deeply human. Without heaters, without hot water, without glass windows, how did people sleep through these freezing winter nights? You feel that question brush against you, softly, but enough to spark your curiosity, while still keeping you calm and relaxed. The storyteller me, standing right beside you, glances toward the long, dark road ahead. Here, I say, with a voice low and warm like the last glow of a dying fire. People learn to sleep, not for comfort, but for survival. And in the coldest nights, they left us stories that speak of patience, of closeness, and of gratitude for even the simplest things. You keep walking with me through the wind-swept yard. A thin dusting of snow settles onto your hair, so lightly that you feel only a faint tingle on your scalp. That tiny moment lets you understand a little of the cold people once faced, yet you're still safe, still warm beneath your blanket, still relaxed in the comfort of the present. They, hundreds of years ago, had only thin earthen walls, a straw roof, and the hope that the fire would last through the night. As you pass by a stable, warm air rises from the animals inside, a heavy, living warmth that makes you feel the contrast, the cutting cold outside, and the thick heat of life within. People back then understood this well, and they learned to use every bit of warmth they could in a world that offered so little of it. You pause, listening. The wind still presses through the rooftops, but beneath it, you begin to hear other sounds, soft and delicate, like threads unraveling the crackle of burning wood, a faint cough from inside a home, a dog rustling through straw to find its place to sleep. These small sounds remind you that this place isn't lonely. People stayed close to one another because they knew that only community, only togetherness, could help them survive the long cold. Your heart slows, softening to the rhythm of the wind, because even while standing in a medieval winter night, you feel something familiar, the feeling known to anyone who has lived through many winters, an understanding that cold is not just weather, but memory, challenge, and the force that gently pushes people closer together. And as you look one last time at the frost-covered roofs, you realize that the story of sleeping without heat is, in truth, a story about how people protected one another, held on to each other, and found warmth in places that seemed to offer none. The night grows deeper. The wind grows older with every passing breath. And now you're ready to step into the next part of this journey. Do you remember that final moment when you stood in the frost-covered village road, when your breath dissolved into the darkness, and the wind whistled like a single thread stretching on through the entire night? It was in that very moment that you truly felt what people of the past faced every single day. The cold wasn't just outside their door, it crept into every corner of their lives. And now, as you take another quiet step deeper into this story, you're about to uncover an important truth that shaped the way medieval people slept. Firewood was almost a luxury. Imagine it in the middle of winter, when the cold had no ending point. Every stick of wood was like a tiny bar of gold. No one dared burn it freely. The villages you're visiting had to be cautious with every piece. They knew that an English medieval winter could stretch on so long that people forgot when the last warm day had even been. You stand before a low-roofed home, where light flickers through the window like a gentle invitation. But as you step closer, you realize that the flame inside is smaller than you expected, so small that you can't quite understand how an entire family depended on it through the night. Inside, the fire doesn't burn the way you know fire to burn today. It only smolders, a faint red glow buried in ash, like the heart of the house trying to beat just a little longer. The family doesn't dare add fresh wood, knowing each piece must be saved for an even colder night or for a stormy morning they cannot predict. You look around and notice that the firewood isn't stacked in large piles the way you've seen in modern homes here. It's just a few small pieces placed neatly in a corner, a handful of sticks for an entire season. Strange, isn't it? People who lived here never saw firewood as something simple. You imagine yourself touching a single stick lying on the dirt floor. It's dry, light, and rare enough that you can almost feel the family hesitation each time they reach for it. Because gathering wood meant traveling far into the forest to collect fallen branches, they couldn't just cut trees freely. The woods belonged to the Lord, and villagers were strictly limited in how much they could take. So every piece of wood, no matter how short or thin, carried the weight of a full day's labor and a small spark of hope. But a shortage of wood didn't only weaken the fire, it made the entire house vulnerable to the cold. The small home you're stepping into has no glass windows, no thick brick walls. All it takes is the slightest gap for the wind to slip in, like an uninvited guest arriving without announcement. You gently push the rough wooden door, and immediately you feel it, a thin blade of wind slipping through some unseen crack in the wall, touching your face like a cold fingertip. People used to say that the winter wind was the silent intruder, never loud, but always persistent. You imagine yourself sitting beside the hearth, stretching your hands forward to catch whatever warmth is left. But it doesn't take long for you to realize the heat here is never enough. It doesn't spread across the room like modern heating. It creates only a tiny circle of warmth, just enough to heat your face, while your back remains cold. People of that era understood this deeply. They knew they couldn't rely on the fire alone. So when night fell, they prepared for sleep, as if preparing for a long journey. You see a woman checking the doorframe, stuffing bits of old cloth into the gaps between the planks. In the corner, a man packs dried moss into cracks in the earthen wall. Their movements are slow and deliberate, almost like a small ritual before the family enters a cold night's rest. And in their eyes sits a quiet worry, because they know one strong gust of wind can drain the heat from the room. You imagine listening to the wooden door tremble under the wind. The sound isn't loud, yet it's enough to make anyone think anxiously about the nights to come. In this world where fuel is scarce, sleep isn't relaxation. It's a survival strategy. And every small detail, every weak ember, every draft in the wall shapes the way people prepared for a night that could feel endless. The mother gathers old linen scraps, layering them into makeshift blankets. The father checks the hearth, rearranging the ashes to keep the coals alive a little longer. The children curl into hand-me-down wool sweaters, tucking themselves close to absorb one another's warmth. you realize you're witnessing something incredibly simple, yet profoundly human. Everyone is trying to keep everyone else warm. Today, you turn on a heater and your room becomes warm in minutes. But in the Middle Ages, people had to use their whole family, their bodies, their breath, their patience to defend themselves against winter. A quiet respect rises in you, because in that scarcity, they learned to see one another as their most important source of heat. And as you leave the small home and step back onto the freezing village road, you carry with you a new understanding. Warmth didn't only come from fire, it came from people. The night is still long, the wind is still sharp, but you now understand more about this world, about the silent perseverance of those who lived before us. And because warmth was always in short supply, I say, my voice drifting like the embers of a fading fire, people of that time began searching for protection in other places, in their faith, in the tiny charms they kept close, as if anything at all might help them endure another winter night. You're walking slowly through that village now, a place where the cold seeps into every crack, where every piece of firewood is guarded like gold, and in that scarcity, something deeply human begins to appear, something simple, touching, and quietly beautiful, a belief in small objects that might bring warmth. You pause in front of an old house. The fire inside has faded to a single red ember, glowing like a cat's eye in the dark. But hanging on the doorframe, you notice something, a scrap of fabric tied with a rough flax string. It's so small that a strong gust could blow it away. Yet the family inside keeps it as if it were a treasure. You step inside, gently, as though afraid you might disturb the sleep of the past. Within, a family is preparing for the cold night. But before they reach for the straw, or the blankets, or the faint warmth of the embers, they do something else. They place a small carved piece of wood on the windowsill, a simple shape made with a dull knife. You lean in to take a closer look. Etched on the piece of wood is a faint image of the sun knot round, not complete, but you can see the effort of a hand that trembled slightly while carving it. People believed the charm could hold on to a little warmth, a little luck, or at least a small sense of safety. The sight makes you smile, not because it's childish, but because it's so human. In this cold world, where wood is scarce, fires burn weakly, and walls can't keep the wind out, medieval people turned to belief not out of extravagance or superstition, but to feel a little less alone during the night. To your right, you notice something else, a flat piece of dried skin, thin like paper. They called it lucky frog skin. People believed that frog screeches that lived through icy ponds and muddy winters carried resilience within them. Keeping a sliver of frog skin nearby felt like borrowing a bit of nature's strength. Children often held the frog skin in their palms before falling asleep. You can easily picture it, tiny hands, stiff with cold, gripping something that carries no heat, but somehow offers protection. There's something funny about it, something sad and something quietly beautiful. You continue walking deeper into the home. In the corner, beside a pile of straw and a few worn linen clothes, you see another object, a small brown cloth. Its stitches are uneven, some long, some crooked, but each one carries the mark of hopeful fingers. People believed that placing the cloth near where they slept would soften the cold, weaken the wind. Of course, you and I both know these objects didn't raise the temperature, they didn't stop the chill, they didn't push back the wind, but they warmed people in another way, one only humans truly understand. They warmed the spirit. You reach out and touch one of these imagined charms. It feels like touching a piece of memory, a symbol of fragility mixed with quiet resilience. The people of that time had so little, which made their hope even more precious. You watch the woman of the house place the carved wooden charm at the head of the bed. She does this every night out of habit, not because she expects it to warm the room, but because she finds comfort in knowing it's there. That simple trust was how they closed the door on a long, cold day. A little belief, a little hope, a little reassurance. You see a child turning the frog-skin charm over in his hands before curling up under a thin wool blanket, setting it right beneath his chin. He believes sleep will come easier with that little friend beside him. Just like how some people today keep an old scarf, a lucky pin, or a photo by their bed to feel safe. The difference is that medieval people didn't have many options. When the world was too cold and too dark, they clung to anything softer than the winter itself. Your heart slows as you look at these small objects. They don't glow, they don't warm, they don't shine, but they whisper something about the people who lived long ago, about how fiercely they held on, even in silence. And then you realize the true warmth of these charms didn't come from the materials at all, but from the peace of someone's heart placed inside them. In the night of the Middle Ages, where fire flickered like sleepy eyes, these little tokens helped people feel less alone. You rise, step out of the house, and return to the village road. The wind is still cold, but your heart is softer now, because you've just brushed against a very human part of the past, where hope came in the shape of a scrap of cloth, a dried piece of frog skin, or a roughly carved stick of wood. In that world, sometimes believing was enough to make it through the night. And because hope was always as small as those tiny charms, people of that time had to search for more practical ways to survive the night, and everything began with the fire they struggled to keep alive until morning. After leaving the house filled with tiny charms and quiet hopes, you continue deeper into that medieval night. And only a few steps later, you notice something else, something unspoken, but far more important than any carved wood or dried frog skin. Because belief can comfort the heart, but to keep a body alive through the night, the people of the past needed something far more practical. They had to keep the fire alive. You stop in front of another small home, where a faint glow spills from the hearth in thin, trembling streaks of yellow. Not the bright flames you're used to, but a dim red light like the last breath of the day. You step inside, and at once you feel its fragile warmth brushing against your skin. Not much, but enough to understand that this warmth is everything to the family who depends on it. As you watch, the woman of the house, with hands marked by small, pale cracks from the cold, is doing something solemn. She is banking the fire. You see her use a wooden stick to push the embers together, gathering them into a single, glowing point, small as a hidden heartbeat beneath the ash. Then she covers them with a thin layer of gray powder, just enough to hold the heat, not enough to smother it. Her movements are slow, practiced, and gentle, and you realize she has done this every night of her life. You lower yourself, as if to see the fire more closely. When the ash settles over the embers, That red glow softens into a warm brown, then fades almost entirely. But beneath that quiet layer, the coals are still alive. They don't blaze, they don't shine, they don't crackle. They simply wait, silent and steadfast, so that with a gentle breath at dawn, the flame can rise again. You can feel the subtle tension in the room. Banking the fire isn't just a technique, it's a promise. A promise that when the night grows too cold, when the wind grows too sharp, when there is no more wood to burn, the home will still hold on to a thread of yesterday's warmth. You notice the man standing nearby, holding two old flints. They're dark, worn, and cold, and you know that if the ember dies during the night, starting a new flame with flints is a true ordeal. Nothing like striking a match or adjusting a thermostat today. It's a long, exhausting, and uncertain process. You imagine yourself striking the two stones together. A sharp, dry clink fills the air. A tiny spark flickers and disappears instantly in the cold. You try again, in your imagination. This time, the faint spark lands on a bit of straw, but the straw refuses to catch. You can almost feel the slow sinking frustration that people once felt whenever their flints failed them. Some nights, it took half an hour, sometimes more, just to coax a small flame into existence. And in the coldest days, a strong wind could blow out hope as easily as breath. That is why banking the fire became the most essential survival skill of the winter. Not everyone could do it well, and families who had a good firekeeper were respected almost like guardians of the community's shared warmth. You look more closely at the woman's hands as she spreads the ash. Her fingers tremble slightly, but within them you sense a quiet, inherited knowledge, passed from generation to generation, from mother to daughter, from elder to youth. To them, keeping the fire wasn't just about warmth. It was about preserving the life of the family. It was holding on to the belief that tomorrow morning they would rise in light and not in a cold sharp as a blade. You hear the man exhale when she finishes. Not a tired sigh, but the soft release of someone who knows that, at least for today, the most important task of protecting the ones he loves is complete. The air shifts slightly. The home becomes still, as if the world itself is bowing toward the tiny ember sleeping beneath the ash. The children pull closer together, their eyes heavy, drifting off in the faint warmth that spreads like a thin ribbon of smoke. In that moment, you understand that banking the fire was a family ritual, a quiet act of respect toward the flame, their only silent companion through a winter that always lasted too long. You take one last look. In the darkness, the mound of ash looks like nothing more than a small, dull heap. But you know beneath that, the ember is sleeping, and it will wake with the morning light. You step outside. The cold wind brushes your face immediately, making the warmth from the house feel precious, almost fragile. And when you look up at the cloud-heavy sky, you understand that if those embers died, the family would face a danger as sharp as winter standing right outside the door, waiting for a chance to enter. In that deep night, the idea of keeping the fire grows larger than you ever imagined. It is patience, devotion, tradition, and hope carried from one sunrise to the next. And then, once the fire was tucked asleep beneath its blanket of ash, the family had to face another truth of the medieval winter homes too thin to hold warmth, where the wind needed only a tiny crack to become an uninvited guest. As you step out of the house where the fire now sleeps beneath its blanket of gray ash, you find yourself once again in the stillness of the village road. But just a few steps later, you begin to feel something different, not the fragile warmth of banked embers, but the sharp cold pushing in from every direction. Because in the Middle Ages, even if people managed to keep their fire alive, they still lived in homes far too thin to stand fully against the winter. You walk toward a small wattle-and-daub house, its earthen walls low, its straw roof bending slightly each time the wind nudges it. When your imagined hand touches that wall, you feel the cold immediately. It's nothing like the brick or concrete you're familiar with today. This wall breathes thin, porous, letting the wind slip through as easily as needles through cloth. You gently push the old wooden door open and step inside. At once, you sense the contrast outside. The wind sings in long, icy strokes. Inside, the silence is heavy, almost still but not warm. The room is so cold you can imagine your breath drifting upward in faint layers, touching the earthen wall before fading away. People back then didn't have better options. Their walls were made of woven wood covered with a mixture of clay, straw, and dried grass. It held its shape, yes, but it never held the warmth. You kneel near the floor and notice tiny gaps no wider than a fingernail little mouths breathing out cold air constantly. Not a loud wind, but the slow, creeping kind. The kind that sinks into their bones after only a few nights. You look around and see the woman of the house patiently stuffing bits of moss into a crack near the roof. In another corner, children are gathering scraps of cloth to plug the draft below the door. Even the older man is packing handfuls of dried grass into a split in the wall. No one complains. This is their nightly routine, mending the house little by little, as if reweaving it to protect themselves from the winter outside. You approach the north wall, the one that faces the strongest winds. You place your hand on it and feel the cold seep through your skin like an underground stream spilling into your palm. Villagers used to say that on the darkest nights. The north wall didn't just feel cold, it spoke soft, cracking sounds, just enough to tell them the winter was gaining ground. In the dim room, you can sense the movement of the air. It weaves through straw, slips along cloth, seeps through gaps that never truly close. It brushes your neck like a distant breath. And in that moment, you understand why sleep here was never simple. People didn't fall asleep because they were comfortable. They slept because they had to save their strength. Every night was a quiet negotiation between humans and the winter. Too close to the wall you freeze. Too far from the fire you freeze. Sleep alone, and the cold digs in deeper. Children were often placed in the middle, not as a privilege, but because their bodies held warmth less effectively. Adults slept on the outside like soft shields, catching the worst of the wind. You imagine lying on the earth floor over a layer of straw. The chill rises through your shoulders immediately, slowly, sharply, like thin needles moving upward. But then, just as gradually, the warmth from the person beside you begins to spread, like a soft whisper saying, "It's all right. We'll get through this together." In the darkness, you hear the wind brushing the straw roof, the faint trembling of cloth on the wall, the quiet crackle of earth cooling even further. None of the sounds are loud, but together they form a winter symphony, somber, gentle, and unmistakably real. You look around and notice a few simple items on a wooden table, a small box filled with dried moss, a frayed piece of cloth, a few leftover wood splinters to plug up new gaps. People never kept these far from reach because every night brought new drafts, as if the house itself were breathing out its own weariness. A soft sense of empathy rises in you. The people of the past weren't just facing the cold. They were living inside spaces that could never truly protect them, rooms that were never fully warm. And in that fragility, they drew closer together. They worked side by side, slept close, shared every bit of body heat as if sharing a precious resource. You can feel that closeness as you imagine standing in the room, their breath forming a thin, living warmth, their presence softening the weight of the dark, their togetherness making the drafts less frightening. You realize that in this world, the greatest warmth never came from the walls or the fire. It came from the people themselves, something even the harshest winter could not take away. You step back outside, returning to the village road. The night wind sweeps across your face again, but this time it feels less harsh. Perhaps because after seeing how they lived, nestled between drafts and thin earthen walls, you understand a deeper layer of their patience and resilience. And as you walk away, the tiny sounds inside that house, the trembling of clay walls, the soft rustle of straw, the faint whisper of wind follow, you guiding you to the next part of this story, where the sounds of a winter night wove a family closer together. As you leave the drafty wattle-and-daub house, the tiny sounds inside seem to linger on your shoulders, light as bits of straw that cling to a sleeve, and with just a few more steps down the village road, you begin to realize something. In the cold of a medieval night, sound was the one thing that never disappeared. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't overwhelming like the noises of our modern world. But it formed its own kind of soundtrack of quiet music only those who had lived through many winters would recognize. You stop in front of another house, where a thin line of light slips through a cracked door. When you listen, the first thing you hear isn't the wind, but a cough raspy, short, touched with fatigue. It's the voice of an older man, perhaps someone whose lungs have worked too hard against the cold drafts night after night. The cough echoes gently, bounces off the earthen walls, then melts into the dark. A moment later, another sound joins it, firewood popping softly. It sounds like someone snapping a twig between their fingers. The pop isn't strong, but it feels like the faint exhale of the last remaining flame in the hearth, a sign that the family inside is still trying to hold on to whatever warmth the day had left them. You step inside, if only in your imagination. In the small room, a dim orange glow blankets the dirt floor like a thin quilt. On it, you see a child curled up in his mother's arms. The child isn't wailing, just letting out tiny, muffled sobs, breaths that quiver more from the cold than from fear. He is learning the winter the same way the village has learned it for generations, quietly, patiently. The sound might feel sad, but it adds a tender rhythm to the room, a gentle reminder that life is still moving, even slowly, even tired. You settle near the hearth, and another sound slips into your ears. The wind, not a cheerful whistle, but a long, far-away sigh. It presses against the cracks, making the scrap of cloth pinned to the door tremble like a weary heartbeat. And yet, when these sounds come together, coughing, crying, wind, embers, They don't clash. They blend into a winter harmony, melancholy, but not hopeless, slow, but not heavy, cold, yet carrying a trace of warmth simply because people are there to hear it. You look around the cramped room. Everyone lies close together, not out of affection, but out of necessity. And yet, that necessity becomes a quiet form of closeness, closer than at any other time of the year. You see the father asleep beside the coldest wall, shielding the family. The mother lies next, and between them, the child. They're so close that one person's breath seems to brush the shoulder of the next. The room doesn't allow for distance, but that lack of space becomes an invisible thread tying them together. Even the objects in the house join the nighttime song, the faint clink of wooden bowls when someone shifts, the soft rustle of straw under their backs, a small sigh as someone tries to find a more comfortable spot. Each sound is simpletony, almost forgettable, and yet each one is a witness to real living life, a life you can only understand by sitting very near and very still, just as you are now. You begin to feel that in this small room. Connection doesn't come from words. It comes from sharing breath, from sharing warmth, from each person becoming part of the family's great blanket. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine lying there with them. On your left, the mother's warm breath. On your right, the slow, steady heartbeat of the father. Beneath you, the soft, slightly damp straw with its faint scent of dry grass. Above you, the straw roof trembling gently every time the wind sweeps across it. And if you were someone in America who had lived through many winters, perhaps you'd feel a strange familiarity, because sound, in every era, touches memory the quickest. It reminds you of old wooden homes, the first snow of the season, the moments when a whole family gathered close just to stay warm and whisper to one another, like the medieval family before you. You understand that sometimes connection doesn't need much at all, just the willingness to listen to the night together. You open your eyes and see the family slowly drifting into sleep, one by one. The sounds soften, too. The coughs grow further apart. The child's cries fade into silence. The firewood quiets, and only the thread-like whistle of wind lingers, circling the house. But instead of loneliness, you feel peace, because every sound carries a trace of life. People who are breathing, enduring, belonging to one another in the cold. And you understand that these very sounds were what carried them through the longest winters, because when you can hear the presence of others, you know you're not alone. And as those sounds slowly dissolve into the darkness, you begin to notice something else. Sleep for these families wasn't just rest. It was a plan, a strategy, a way to hold on to warmth and strength before the next day's battle with the cold. After the winter night sounds fade and the house settles into the steady rhythm of a sleeping family, you begin to feel something very clearly in the Middle Ages. Sleep wasn't the natural choice you know today. Sleep was a strategy for survival. You stand at the threshold of that small room, listening as each person's breathing melts into the darkness. And slowly, you realize that every detail of how they prepared for sleep was deliberate, like a quiet negotiation with the winter outside. People of the past knew the body could only hold so much warmth. No electric heaters, no heated blankets, no thick brick walls, only what nature provided. So they learned to layer themselves linen, wool. Furrick won a soft suit of armor against the cold. You imagine your hand brushing over a rough linen shirt, not soft like modern fabric, but carrying its own kind of warmth, the warmth of practicality and endurance. Over the linen came the wool thicker, heavier, spun from the sheep they tended every day, and on the outermost layer, sometimes fur not for style, but for survival, you see the father placing his old wool tunic over his child, a silent shield of protection. The mother checks her husband's linen, adjusting the collar so the wind won't slip in at the back of his neck. Everything happens quietly, but with deep care. When everyone is covered in enough layers, they turn to the one source of heat winter cannot take from them each other. You watch them settle down, not randomly, but according to a natural order shaped by generations. Children sleep in the middle, where it's warmest. Parents line the edges. The elderly sometimes choose the coldest spot near the wall, not because they're neglected, but because they want the warmth to go to their grandchildren first. In the dark, you see them shift closer, gently, like water moving when touched by a breeze. Their breaths mingle soft on one another's necks, shoulders, hair. The small room seems to draw itself tighter, gathering everyone in like stones clustering together when the tide slips away. You notice the warmth spreading slowly but certainly from palms, from steady chests, from quiet breathing, from the closeness of those who love each other. You imagine lying beside them, feeling the rise of warmth from the straw beneath you, the soft brush of a child's hair by your shoulder, the thin hand of a mother resting atop the wool blanket. It isn't comfort, it's survival. They needed one another to sleep, and they needed sleep to keep living. Medieval nights were long. Darkness fell early and didn't loosen its grip until daylight was sure you'd given nearly everything you had to endure it. But the people of the past knew how to make that darkness work for them. You looked toward the small window. No artificial lights, no street lamps, no glowing screens. The night becomes thick, layered like a natural blanket laid gently across the entire village. People cherished the darkness because when the door closed and night folded in, the house sealed tighter and the wind weakened. The darkness became a thin, invisible insulation, nothing you could touch, nothing you could see, but still something that kept the warmth from escaping too quickly. You close your eyes and share that calm with them. Every sound seems softened, the faint flicker from the hearth, the slow breaths, the subtle shift of someone settling into straw. No one sleeps because it's comfortable. No one sleeps to relax. They sleep to preserve strength for hauling water in the morning, for tending the animals, for chopping wood and turning hay, for surviving a world where every night could become a test. Sleep, for them, was like a safe landing in the middle of a winter storm, a small moment of pause before facing the cold all over again. You feel something soften inside you as you watch them rest, a quiet gratitude, a gentle respect for the simplicity, persistence, and closeness of their lives. And as you step away from this scene, you understand that medieval people left us a profound lesson. Sleep isn't merely rest, it is how human beings hold one another close to keep life going through the longest nights. And from this strategy of sleeping close, people of the past discovered another way to survive the cold by gathering multiple families under one roof on the harshest nights, borrowing warmth from the community itself. As you leave the house where a family curled together like small stones, warming one another in the dark, you step back out onto the quiet village road. And soon, you realize something important. Closeness didn't stop at the threshold of each home. In the Middle Ages, on nights when the cold was sharp as a blade, survival wasn't just the responsibility of one family, it belonged to the entire community. You notice a wavering glow coming from a larger house at the end of the lane. Not a manor, just the home of a big family, or perhaps a place where several families have gathered for a freezing night. You walk closer, push open the warped wooden door, and immediately sense something different from the other houses. The warmth of people thick, slow, unmistakably alive. In the dim light, you see many figures lying close together on a wide bed of straw. They don't all know each other well, but on the coldest nights, that doesn't matter. They lie there like one large living body, many lungs, many heartbeats, but one shared goal, keeping one another alive. You hear someone whisper, "Tonight's bitter." Everyone's gathered together for warmth. Simple words, but holding an entire tradition of survival. You sit down and let your eyes adjust to the darkness. Children rest at the center, where the heat is strongest. They sleep deeply, their cheeks warm with the glow of gathered breath. Some curl into each other like small birds in a nest. Around them lie the adults' living windbreaks, soft walls made of flesh and breath. The mother places her hand on her child's back, not to soothe, but to feel the reassurance of the child's warmth. The father lies close, his body acting as a shield against drafts slipping in from the window. Farther out are the neighbor, cousins, friends, people who may only greet each other during harvest. But tonight, they lie side by side like family. You can feel their breath blending together, slow and steady, sometimes warm, sometimes damp, but always real. It spreads through the room, making the cramped space feel like one long embrace that winter can only watch from outside. You spot an elderly woman lying near the very edge, where it's coldest. She isn't there because she was pushed out. She chose that place herself. She wants the children and the sturdier adults to lie in the warmer center. Her silver hair looks like scattered moonlight against her worn wool shirt, and her half-closed eyes carry a calm simplicity as if she has lived through hundreds of winters like this. And all she needs is the sound of her grandchildren breathing to feel warm again. A familiar scent rises in the room, damp wool, straw, faint sweat, a touch of smoke left for the afternoon. These smells might feel strange to you today, but to them, this is the smell of safety, the smell of not being alone. You lift your imagined hand and touch the air. It's warmer here than anywhere else you've been in the village. Not because of the fire. The fire has long since faded, leaving only a few dim embers, but because of the heat of human beings, the most precious source of warmth on a winter night without stoves. Human warmth, the one thing you can't store, can't purchase, can't build with tools. It exists only when people draw close, lie near, breathe together. You sense something wonderful, despite the closeness, despite the bodies pressed side by side. The intimacy isn't romantic. It's primal, practical, and profoundly honest. They lie close not because of affection, but because winter spares no one. You notice a small child shifting, tugging a wool shirt over her feet. The person beside her, not her mother, maybe not even a relative, startles slightly, then gently pulls the straw blanket around the child. A natural gesture, no words, no eye contact, just warmth passing from one person to the next. You hear someone sigh, then slip into deeper sleep. the soft rustling of cloth, the faint creak of straw beneath bodies, the quiet scraping of legs adjusting for comfort, tiny sounds, but together forming a communal melody, human, honest, unadorned. In that moment, you realize a simple, profound truth in the harshness of winter. Survival doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who know how to lean on one another. You look one last time at the group, a soft, breathing circle, warm from within, and understand that borrowing warmth isn't only about keeping body heat. It is leaning on one another's presence to make it through a long night. No one here is truly alone, no matter how little they own or how cold the world outside becomes. On nights like these, the community itself becomes the largest blanket. And when the whole village gathers its warmth into one living circle, your attention drifts to what lies beneath them, a simple bed of straw, fragile at first glance, yet carrying a quiet, essential role through the long winter nights. After leaving the room where families huddled together, borrowing warmth from one another, you step into a dim courtyard where moonlight settles quietly across the thin layer of snow like a delicate cloth draped over the earth. And now you begin to notice something small but essential, something that lay right beneath their backs throughout those long nights, the straw beds. You enter another small house, and the first thing you notice isn't the hearth, nor the wool clothes hanging along the wall, but the thick bundles of golden straw layered across the floor, forming a wide bed over the packed earth. At first glance it looks simple, almost crude, but when you lean closer, you see a quiet beauty in it, the soft scent of dried grass, the fine dust brushing against your fingertips, and the springy, gentle weave of straw strands holding each other like interlocked fingers to keep warmth in. You try sitting down on that imagined straw. The moment your body settles, a gentle rustle rises soft, dry, like the sound of old book pages being turned in silence. It's a sound that makes you slow down, breathe deeper, and realize that although straw isn't plush like modern bedding, it carries its own kind of warmth. People of the past knew this well, which is why straw was replaced often, not for hygiene, not for comfort, but because fresh straw kept its springiness, stayed dry, and held trapped air, creating a natural insulation no other material of the time could match. You let your hand glide over the thick layer of straw. You can feel warmth lingering between the strands, like countless tiny pockets holding bits of heat from the bodies that slept on them. It's the air, the captured breath of the day that protects them from the cold rising up from the ground, not the straw itself. In some homes, people mixed dried herbs into the straw, wild lavender, a little mint, rosemary not for luxury, but to deter insects and bring a faint sweetness to their sleep. You lean closer to a bundle of straw and imagine inhaling that gentle, earthy fragrance, a smell that evokes old wooden chests where grandmothers once kept knitted scarves, or bundles of dried flowers hanging in a farmhouse kitchen. These scents didn't just bring comfort. They offered a small moment of peace inside a world far too harsh. You feel that clearly as you sit inside the small room, the weak light from the hearth casting a warm haze onto the old straw roof above. You notice a child settling onto the freshly laid straw, clutching a thin wool blanket. He closes his eyes and pats the straw softly to make it a little more comfortable. That tiny gesture, simple, so instinctive as how people of the past found what little ease they could within the limits of their world. You know, straw beds weren't soft, not flat. Sometimes a sharp piece poked through and pricked the skin, but when night fell and the cold rose from the earth, that bed became more valuable than anything else. It lifted the body above the icy ground. It held warmth close to the skin. It turned a cold, bare corner of a house into a place someone could survive the night. You imagine lying down with them. Your body sinks into the springy straw. You hear it whisper beside your ear. You feel your own heat settling into the tiny pockets of air between the dried blades. And suddenly, you understand straw beds weren't makeshift solutions. They were the product of lived knowledge, people using nature itself to fend off nature. Inside the little home, you watch the mother carefully add a fresh layer of straw near the head of the bed. The father smooths the straw at the foot, making sure no one will feel the cold leaking up from the ground. These movements are slow, repeated, meaningful, an evening ritual the whole family performs together. You sense the quiet care in the way they prepare their sleeping place, the mother spreading the wool blanket, the father gathering the old straw to place aside, the child picking up stray pieces that fell to the floor. Each person contributes a little to build that small, warm corner. You take one last look around the room. The straw bed has no curtains, no frame, no luxury. But within it lies the warmth of labor, the breath of a family, and the mindfulness of tradition. And as you rise and look up at the old straw roof, you feel something strange, though humble and rough. That bedding offers a kind of peace that even modern, comfortable beds sometimes can't match, a peace born from people using the simplest things to protect one another through the night. And as you step away from that golden bed, still carrying the scent of dried grass, you begin to notice the next thing that softened the winters bite the warm treasure left behind by the village's sheep. As you rise from the straw bed, still carrying the faint scent of herbs and dried grass, your eyes drift toward a thick folded blanket resting in the corner of the room. The weak glow from the hearth spills onto the fabric, revealing an unusual color, not red, not gold, but a soft, earthy shade of wool, the kind of warmth-tinted hue that seems to hold the breath of sheep grazing on wind-swept hills. And then you realize, in the cold world of the medieval winter, sheep's wool was the true treasure. Not gold, not silver, not fine luxuries, but wool, the humble material woven into every breath of life here. You move closer and let your imagined hand touch the blanket. It's thick, heavy, and warm in a way that feels wonderfully grounded. When you lift a corner, it feels as if you're lifting an entire summer, stored away, kept safe in every spun thread by patient, knowing hands. In this tiny house, wool is everywhere. You see it in the father's quilted tunicates, stitches uneven but stubbornly strong, in the mother's scarf fraying at the edges, yet still holding warmth, in the child's little wool hat pulled low over the ears, cradling the small head that sleeps soundly after a long, cold day. You even see wool hanging on the walls, thick and rough like makeshift curtains to block the drafts that no amount of mud or straw could keep out. These wall hangings aren't pretty, not ornate, but every strip of wool is a timeline, storing the touch of the hands that spun and wove them during long summer months. You glance around the room and almost hear the wool whisper, "I'm here to keep you warm from one generation to the next." And truly, wool wasn't just a household item. It was wealth. It was dowry. It was something parents passed down to their children, A good wool blanket could follow a family for decades, through countless winters, like a faithful companion. You imagine lifting the blanket to your face. The scent rises softly, linen mixed with soil, a trace of hearth smoke, and that faint, unmistakable note of lanolin. It's a strange blend, but a peaceful one like scents tucked into old American farmhouse trunks, or the smell of wool coats drying near a stove in childhood winters. The smell isn't about cleanliness. It's about life, about endurance. Your eyes drift to the sleeping child on the straw bed. His little hat has slipped to the side, revealing wisps of fine hair. And you recognize something small but important. That wool hat is keeping him alive. The head loses warmth fastest. Medieval mothers knew this long before science explained it. You watch the mother gently pull the wool blanket closer to the child's shoulder, then lay another layer across her husband. No one speaks, but every movement is directed toward warmth, simple, slow, and loving. You sit near the folded blanket and examine the quiet pattern woven into it. You imagine the day this blanket was nothing more than a pile of fleece clinging to a sheep on an open hillside, wind combing through the wool, the flock grazing peacefully, unaware that their coats would one day protect a family through winter nights. You can picture the sound of shears slicing through fleece on a summer afternoon, women washing wool at a cold stream, the scent of the open field mixing with the smell of fresh-washed fiber. All those moments gathered, spun, woven became the heavy blanket beneath your hand right now. Inside this small room, wool is like a quiet barrier holding winter at bay. Not flashy, not expensive, not refined, just steadfast like the people themselves. You feel a gentle gratitude as you watch the family snuggle into their wool coverings. No luxuries, no modern comforts, just wool and the tender warmth passed down by sheep that lived side by side with humans for centuries. Wool becomes a bridge between people and nature. Nature gives warmth. Humans shape it with patience, and wool stays behind as proof of adaptation and endurance. A soft smile touches you as you think of this on long winter nights. That dense wool blanket is the single thing standing between them and the cold sky above. Not fancy, but faithful. Not soft by modern standards, but trustworthy. Not beautiful, but full of love. Just like the people of the Middle Ages, steady, humble, and skilled at turning the smallest gifts of nature into the greatest sources of warmth. And while you're still basking in the quiet warmth of those humble woolen threads, just a few steps away, a different world waits, a world where the wealthy sink into feather beds so soft that winter seems to stop at the door. As you leave the humble home, with its heavy wool blanket still warm with the breath of the people who slept beneath them, the village path stretches out before you again, dark and gentle like a strip of soft fabric. This time, though, your steps carry you toward a small rise in the land, toward the homes of those who lived a little more comfortably, where winter felt just a bit less cruel. You place your hand on the largest wooden door you've seen so far. When it opens, you sense the difference immediately. Warmth greets you, but not the kind that rises from straw, wool, or clustered bodies. This warmth comes from a space that has been intentionally crafted, carefully prepared to hold back the winter with elegance and thoughtfulness. The bedroom inside feels like another world entirely. You step in and feel the air softer, lighter, carrying the faint scent of herbs lavender, A little dried mint mingled with the warm, earthy smell of oak from an old cabinet. Candlelight flickers on the walls, dancing across thick tapestries that hang like soft shields. These tapestries aren't mere decoration. They are walls of warmth, quiet defenders woven from months of autumn labor. And then, in the center of the room, you see it, the largest bed you've encountered on your journey. A bed that tells you instantly that you've stepped into a realm that the poor could only dream of, a feather bed. You sit on its edge in your imagination. The mattress dips gently beneath you, soft, buoyant, warm in a delicate way, not heavy like straw, not rough like wool. Inside the mattress, the feathers feel like tiny clouds gathered and held in place, ready to lift and cradle anyone who lies upon them. You rest your hand on the feather quilt spread across the bed. It's so light that when you lift it, the candle flame stirs, but when you let it fall, it drapes over the skin like a warm breath, quiet, effortless, almost tender. You feel as if someone has guided you gently closer to the fire. Beside it lies a small herb-filled pillow, its scent rising softly, evoking memories of old New England homes where elders tucked dried lavender into bedding to soothe their sleep in the long winters. Wealthy medieval families did the same, slipping dried herbs into pillows to calm the mind and invite rest. You move toward the wall and touch one of the thick tapestries hanging there like a great woven mural. It's soft, dense, and astonishingly warm. If you press your ear to it, you'll hear the wind outside fighting to sweep through, only to be met with quiet, patient resistance. Unlike the straw-roofed cottages where draft slipped through every crack, this room feels like a warm cocoon outside. The medieval night might be slicing through the world like a blade, but inside the air is soft enough to slow a heartbeat. You imagine lying down on that bed. The feathers lift you as if you're floating on calm water. The quilt wraps around you like a gentle hush. The herbal pillow cradles your head with a cool sweetness. You feel you could fall asleep without struggle. Here, sleep is a luxury, not a battle. This space makes you wonder, how can two worlds exist in the same winter? One of straw and cold dirt floors, and one of feather beds and warm candlelight. You remember the straw beds in the poorer homes, springy, warm but uneven, smelling of hay and earth. Then you look again at the feather bed, clean, soft, fragrant, sealed from the wind as if winter itself had been locked outside. Yet, between these two worlds, you sense the same quiet truth in their own ways. People were trying to keep warmth close, to keep life steady, to keep love alive, to endure winters that were as much a test of spirit as they were of body. You rise from the imagined softness of the feather bed and step toward the door. The candlelight brushes the tapestries and blankets, making the room seem to breathe slowly, deeply, like the peaceful sleep of those fortunate enough to live here. The door closes behind you, and you return to the village path. The cold wind presses against your skin again, reminding you that most people here would never know what it felt like to lie in a bed like that. And while the wealthy relied on feather beds to keep winter at bay, many other families turned to a simpler, cleverer solution, tucking themselves into tiny built-in sleeping nooks, hidden in the walls, where warmth was kept close like in nature's own sheltered nests. Leaving the luxurious room with its feather bed soft as a drifting cloud, you step back onto the dark village path. now sinking deeper into the night's cold breath. The wind slides through bare branches, carrying that sharp reminder that most people here didn't have thick walls, woven tapestries, or cloud-soft bedding to shelter them from winter. You walk toward the smaller house, slow wooden homes tucked beneath old thatched roofs, and inside one of these modest dwellings, you discover something wonderfully simple yet surprisingly clever, a built-in sleeping nook carved right into the wall, a little wooden nest hidden in the heart of the home. You bend down and gently open the small wooden door leading into that tiny space. The glow from the main room's fire spills in, laying a warm, golden wash across the darkened wood. The nook is just big enough for 1 or 2 people to lie inside, but the moment you look in, you feel its warmth. It's as if every breath of cold from outside has been stopped at the doorway. Your hand drifts across the wooden surface. It's rough, uneven, rustic, yet warmer than you expect. The wood has absorbed years of human breath, fire heat, and hearth smoke. It feels like a cocoon carefully shaped to hold the sleepers who curl inside. Here, warmth isn't something you create. It's something you keep from breath, from skin, from the closeness of small space. You peek further into the nook. A thin wool blanket is folded neatly inside. Beneath it lies a fresh layer of straw, thick, fragrant, with herbs. The whole nook carries a soft blend of old wood and dried grass, the kind of gentle scent any older American who grew up near a farm would recognize instantly. The scent of home plain, familiar, deeply comforting. You brush your fingers across the imagined straw. A soft rustle rises, like the nook itself, exhaling. You sense that if you lay down here, the cold would fall away after just a few breaths. It's a comfort no large room could ever offer. In one corner of the nook, you notice a few handmade toys, a little straw doll, a smooth river stone, scraps of wool half-woven, and you understand that for medieval children, these tiny wall nests weren't just sleeping spots. They were secret caves, private worlds where winter had no power and where worries felt far away. You imagine their soft giggles as they crawled in, pulled the door shut, and felt warmth wrapping around them like the arms of nature itself. For those children, these wall nooks were places winter simply couldn't reach. You slide a little farther into the nook in your mind and sit down inside that narrow wooden pocket. The small space makes you breathe slower, quieter. Your heartbeat settles into a gentler rhythm. From here, you can hear the fire crackling in the main room, the soft tread of someone moving on packed earth, and the wind pressing tired sighs against the outer walls. But inside this nook, all those sounds soften, becoming distant, muted echoes, enough to remind you that the world is still out there, but not enough to disturb your calm. Inside this small shelter, you feel the deeper meaning behind curling into a nest when the world grows harsh. Sometimes what a person needs most is a tiny place, close, enclosed, gentle, where both body and spirit can rest. You look up at the simple wooden ceiling. The beams cross each other quietly, sturdy despite their roughness. The carpenter who built this nook wasn't chasing beauty, he was crafting protection. You think about the hands that shaped it, calloused, cracked from cold, but skilled enough to make wood hold warmth like an embrace. You touch the inner wall and feel heat seeping through from the main room. The nook warms slowly, like a little wooden box filling with life. It doesn't need spaciousness to feel safe. It doesn't need luxury to feel gentle. It doesn't need much at all to feel warm. You close your eyes and imagine yourself lying inside like a true medieval sleeper, your back against soft straw, your head resting on smoothed wood, your breath rising and returning to you in quiet warmth. It feels like slipping into a soft cocoon where time slows and the world shrinks to a size that no longer demands defenses. This tiny wall nook small, hidden stands as proof of human ingenuity, proof that even with so little, people found ways to create what mattered most: warmth. It isn't luxurious. It isn't grand. But it works so well that those who slept here could rest deeply, even while winter roared just outside. And as you leave this little wooden nest, its warmth still lingering on your fingertips, you soon discover yet another way. People held onto ketone so practical it might surprise the modern mind, sleeping beside their animals, those four-legged companions who carried powerful warmth through the long winter nights. As you gently step out of that tiny, built-in nest, its warmth still lingering on your fingertips, like a quiet farewell. A few steps toward the back of the house bring you into a different world, rougher, less tidy, yet essential to the survival of countless medieval families. You arrive at the livestock shed. You stand before its heavy wooden door, and even before you open it, you feel warmth seeping through the cracks raw, unmistakable warmth, so different from human heat, but no less vital. When you push the door open, the first sound you hear is breathing, not voices, not straw rustling, just long, heavy breaths from the large animals resting inside. A wave of warm air rolls toward you, carrying the smell of hay, damp earth, and the body heat of cows, goats, and pigs. To the modern mind, it may not be pleasant, but to medieval people, it was the scent of survival. You step in. The glow of a small oil lamp hangs from a wooden post, casting amber hues over broad, quiet bodies. A brown cow lies chewing slowly. A white goat curls into the straw. A pig sleeps deeply, its ribs rising and falling in steady rhythm. And among these large forms, you see people. An elderly man sits leaning against the side of a cow, his back pressed into the animal's thick hide like it's a living wall of heat. Nearby, a young woman holds a child in her arms, resting close to a sleeping goat. Warmth radiates from the animal into the cramped little shed and wraps around her and the baby like a heavy blanket. You crouch down and touch the straw underfoot softer than you expected. A thick layer is spread here, both to absorb moisture and to hold warmth. When you slide your fingers into it, you can feel the heat rising from below, as if the earth itself were breathing in time with the animals. You realize livestock give off more heat than humans, much more. A single adult cow can warm a small hut. A cluster of goats can heat up an entire room. People of the past learned this not from books, but from winters so cold their breath froze inside their own homes. And so, on the coldest nights, they carried blankets, straw, and sometimes their whole families into the shed. You look at the woman sleeping there. Despite the lack of cleanliness, despite the absence of privacy or comfort, her face is peaceful, astonishingly so. In this half-human, half-animal space, she seems to feel a primal kind of safety, deep and wordless. You let your hand rest on the imagined hide of the cow beside her. It's warm, slightly damp, and carries a musky scent and aroma that might feel foreign at first, yet somehow familiar if you let your heart soften. Like the scent of old Midwest barns or farmyards seen from the highway on long drives in your youth, the smell of earth, grass, work, and heavy, loyal breathing. You notice, too, the strange bond between humans and livestock here, not affection in the way we love pets today, but a bond of survival. Humans tended to these animals all year, and in winter, the animals returned the favor with their warmth, a simple exchange, yet profound, woven through thousands of years. You watch the sleeping child in the woman's arms. Its head rests on a worn woolen sleeve. Whenever the cow next to them exhales heavily, a warm gust washes over the baby's cheeks, tinting them rosy. The child shifts a little but doesn't wake. It has grown so used to the smells and sounds of animals that it knows them the way it knows the breath of its own family. You scan the shed. Pairs of boots sit by the door. Old coats hang on the post. A thin wool blanket lies across a bed of straw. These small things speak of a life that's makeshift but deeply practical, and remind you that in the cutting cold of a medieval night, the greatest luxury was warmth, no matter where it came from. You sit beside a sleeping goat. Its chest rises and falls in slow, steady breaths. When you close your eyes, you can hear 4, 5, 6 rhythms of breathing, blending together human and animal, large and small, warm and warmer. These sounds, unrefined as they are, turn into a winter lullaby. And in that moment, you understand something simple. Life rests on life. Human beings and their livestock leaned into each other not by choice, but because nature required it of them. It was humility before the cold, and the highest form of adaptation. And as you step out of the livestock shed, the scent of hay and animal heat clinging softly to your clothes, the village path will carry you toward one final scene, the great hall where Lord slept, wrapped in a rare warmth most people could only imagine. Leaving the livestock shed, the warmth still clinging to your clothes, mixed with the scent of hay and the heavy breath of cows and goats, you step back into the night. The cold wind rushes in again, reminding you that most villagers survived winter with nothing more than their bodies, their straw beds, their wool, their banked hearths, and the animals they raised. But then, only a few dozen steps down the dark earthen road, another kind of light appears, the light spilling from the Lord's great hall. It isn't the faint glow that flickers inside poor cottages. It isn't the yellow shimmer of oil lamps in the livestock shed. This is a different kind of light, bright, bold, pouring from tall door cracks, as if winter itself dared not come near. As you draw closer, you hear the fire, not the weary crackling of a small hearth, but a powerful, roaring burn, the kind that could stay bright until dawn. You push open the heavy oak door, and the world instantly changes. You enter a vast, great hall with soaring ceilings, thick stone walls, and at its center, a massive hearth. Flames leap inside it with a strength you haven't seen anywhere else in the village. Large stones surrounding the fire have been heated for hours, each one glowing faintly, radiating warmth like hidden suns buried within the earth. You feel the heat wash over your skin like a soft, invisible blanket. This warmth is different from human breath, different from the heat of animals, different even from the closeness of a wall nest. It is the warmth of wealth, of power, of abundance. You walk slowly through the hall, your eyes adjusting to the golden red glow shining across the stone walls. Along the walls hang large, intricate tapestries, woven partly for beauty, partly for insulation. Each tapestry carries the colors of autumn long gone, the browns of fallen leaves, the mossy greens of the forest, the rusty reds of dried wild flowers. Thick fur rugs cover the stone floor, turning your footsteps soft and quiet like walking on a fresh snowfall. There is no wind here, no heavy animal breath, no clatter of hooves or rustle of dry straw. Everything feels orderly, sheltered, complete. You look at the beds arranged along the walls, wide, thick mattresses, down-filled quilt-soft, weightless, herb-stuffed pillows that smell faintly of lavender and sweet hay. Each bed looks like a small world of comfort, a stark contrast to the uneven straw piles and cold dirt floors the poor must sleep on. You notice a servant adding more logs to the enormous hearth. They move quietly, deliberately, for here, tending the fire isn't a desperate struggle. It's simply routine. Wood is plentiful, and winter has no leverage in this room. You touch the heavy curtains draped near the windows. The fabric is cool to your hand. But when you pull it closer to the wall, the draft disappears instantly, as if the whole room is standing guard against the cold outside. You run your fingers along the stone wall and feel the heat it has stored for hours. The warmth is solid, dependable, like a deep breath exhaled by the earth itself. You sit on a large wooden chair, its legs resting gently on the fur rugs, and you realize something profound in this place. Sleep is a privilege. The wealthy sleep in warmth not because of ingenuity, not because of resilience, but because they can buy heat. You think of everything you've seen tonight in the village, a family curling tightly in a corner to keep each other's breath close, a child tucked inside a tiny wooden nest in the wall, a mother leaning into a goat's warmth to keep her infant alive, an old man resting against a cow because his bones can't endure another night of cold. And now you stand in a room where the fire never dies. Two worlds separated by only a few hundred steps, yet as distant as two seasons. You close your eyes for a moment and let the warmth soak into your fingers. And when you open them, the great hall feels less like a bedroom and more like a symbol, a monument to contrast. One side of winter is hardship, the other is excess. You breathe softly and understand that each winter carved this duality into history, etched into stone, woven into wool, burnt into hearth ash, preserved in every story of survival and comfort. And as you leave the great hall, stepping once more into the dark village road, you realize that medieval winter was never just a story about how people slept, but a story about imbalance, endurance, and the single thread of warmth that bound all lives together, the simple will to outlast the night. Looking back on the entire journey through those small medieval English homes, you can feel something unmistakable no matter how harsh the winter became. People always found a way to keep one another warm, not through wealth, but through closeness, not through comfort, but through resilience, through community, and through the simplest things: shared breath, a bed of straw, a woolen blanket, a small fire, or simply the quiet knowledge that sleeping side by side meant you weren't alone in the long night. And maybe that's the gentle lesson this story wanted to offer you tonight. In our modern world, we sometimes forget that real warmth isn't the number on a thermostat. It's the presence of another human being, the small things we share quietly, day after day. And just like the people of the Middle Ages, You don't have to stay strong forever. You only need to know how to lean on someone when life begins to feel cold. If this story brought you a little peace, a little softness, or simply helped your breathing slow before sleep, then I'm truly grateful you spent this time here with me. And if you enjoy drifting into sleep through journeys like this, little pieces of history told gently, you're welcome to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next quiet adventure. Wishing you a soft night and a deep, restful sleep.